Yeah, we're live. Let's see if I can crank this up a little bit here. A little bit. We are live. Today we're going to talk about carbureted M90 superchargers, and I ran an M90 with a carburetor. I did it in two different configurations. We ran one because we ran the M90 from the 3800 Series 2 and Series 3 V6 motor, and we ran one with a carburetor and an elbow entering the backside of basically where the throttle body is attached on the M90 supercharger. We ran it there and it worked fine. You know, it did what it was supposed to do. The carburetor worked. It drew the fuel into the blower. And in that configuration, this is what we're going to talk, one of the things we're going to talk about tonight. In that configuration, it drew the air and the fuel in from the end of the blower. And then it traveled the length of the rotor and discharged kind of toward the front where the discharge is on the bottom side of the blower. So it's drawing it in the back and then exiting out the bottom. When we ran the carburetor in the way that it is in the photo that I showed in the thumbnail, we mounted the carburetor on top. We drilled a big hole and welded a standoff on it, and then attached an adapter, and then put a carburetor on this flat plate using a Wilson 4-hole spacer. The spacer wasn't technically necessary, but all it did was allow us a better transition from the carburetor into basically what was kind of a 4-inch hole is what we used. And so all that worked fine. So we had to have a big hole in the top of the blower, and that's not unusual. We look at any of the 671s, 871s, 1071s, all of that style blower, and any of the little B&M blowers and YN blowers and all that stuff. A lot of them are like that. They have a carburetor pad mounted on top of the blower, and the blower draws in the air and fuel and distributes out the bottom. And in those cases, they don't have anything. They don't have the air in any way entering the backside of that. So it's all just entering from the top. We like, when we run these bigger blowers, having two carburetors so that we have air and fuel, distributed basically the whole length of the rotor pack, and that works very well. It works okay with a single blower, with a single carburetor too. We've run that many times. I would like to, and just as an afterthought here, I would like to see if there's a gain in distribution from running one carburetor on a V8 with the blower as opposed to running two on these bigger blowers. But on the smaller ones, we obviously can't do that. But the question for tonight is, and this will actually be our poll. Our poll will be, we're going to do something a little bit differently. Okay, so the question is, does the performance world, we'll put performance in there. Does the performance world need a Carb M90 blower capable of 600 to 700 horsepower? So not a really big blower. There's lots of big blowers out there. Lots of blowers that can make lots and lots of power. But for for the milder side, for the stuff that's 600 or 700 and below, for a guy looking to add 100 horsepower, 100 foot-pounds of torque, or whatever, does the world need a smaller blower? Because we see that I think YN and Holly and a lot of these guys don't have smaller carbureted blowers now. So is there an opportunity for that? So does the world need that? Let me know what you guys think. But we're going to talk about the M90 test that I did. The other question I have for you, and you guys just let me know in the comments. But running, you can see how we ran this blower on top of the M90. So there are a couple things to consider. And we've talked about this before when I did these other videos. But there's a couple things to consider. One is we had this carburetor stacked way off of the blower. So it had this long, semi-long discharge tube. We had a connection there between the two tubes with a silicone coupler, and then we had the flange, and then we had the carb adapter or the spacer, and then the carburetor. So if the carburetor was down closer to the blower, like mounted kind of on the blower, do you think that would be better? Would it make more power doing it that way? If the carburetor was closer to the blower, would that be better? Would it make more power? The other thing to think about, and we talked about this with the carburetor position on the back side of the blower as opposed to the top of the blower. So when we're drawing the air into the backside of the blower and we're using essentially all of the rotors, is that better for power? Is it better to have the air coming into the back of the blower as opposed to the top of the blower? Or are we not using all of the rotor pack, and are we not getting as good of efficiency? Are we not getting as much airflow when we have, let's say, a carburetor or a top mounted, any sort of top feed supercharger? So does it suffer from that, the way that we had to cut up that blower? Is it gonna be less efficient of a supercharger not having that, not having the air travel through the whole length of the rotor, having it just be on top? Is that worse? Let me know what you guys think, and I'll tell you what I think. And this is what happened, because we know that we've run the blower both ways. I can tell you that when we ran the carburetor on top of it, first of all, I didn't even know if that was going to work, because when I did this, we had to cut a hole, which is very easy, but then we had to weld stuff to it, to a fairly thin wall rotor, or a thin wall like blower housing that was prone to warpage. So it had all sorts of problems. It was porous. It was not very good material. This one, we cleaned it as much as we could, but still had stuff on it, paint and stuff on it. And then was prone to warpage, which that's very normal for something, especially something that had a fairly precision tolerance, that has to accept a rotor pack that spins at 10, 15, 20,000 RPM. So that's problematic. We were able to clearance that, but it's not, when I did that, it was nowhere near ideal. It just would spin. The rotor would spin in there. So it was not measured in any way to see if it was the same everywhere along the rotor pack. But we were able to get the carbureted deal to work, and it did work. But the question is, when we run the carburetor on top of there, we weren't really using all the rotor pack. We're just using a portion of it, however big that opening is. But the gain that we are getting is using the carburetor on top of here and the carburetor on the backside of it, as opposed to just running air through it like we would with the throttle body. We're getting the benefit of charge cooling, because we're getting fuel going through the blower. It does another negative thing. It does displace some of the airflow through the blower, but it also adds charge cooling. So good from a detonation threshold standpoint, maybe bad for airflow. Good for charge cooling, not just from a detonation standpoint, but from a power standpoint. So that should improve things. So, what is do we have a net gain or a net loss from doing that with a carburetor? For instance, if we would have machined this and not welded anything, well, I don't know how we could have done it by not welding anything. If we would have not run a carburetor on top of it, we would have just run a 4150 like 4-hole throttle body, would we gain the same thing? I mean, in that sense, I don't think so. I think that would be worse, because we wouldn't get the gain from the charge cooling. All we get is an airflow. But here's the other thing is, and I didn't mention this, is when we're talking about this, the opening in the blower at the top is much bigger than the opening is on the backside. So we're exposing more airflow to the rotor pack than we would by coming in the backside. So the flow should increase that way also. But does it? And unfortunately, I didn't run an air hat on this thing, which I should have done, because that would have been very good information. So maybe next time we run some blower stuff on there, I'll run an air hat on there and kind of see what's going on. The air hat will also help tell us, when we have, if we have belt slippage, as the air start backing up, when does it become a problem? Normally we could see that on the power curve too, but it would be nice to have the airflow data as well. And we did have charge temperature data, which running the blower that blower with a carburetor and drawing through there definitely changed the charge temperature dramatically. It was like and we've seen this on blow through carbureted applications too. I haven't run a bunch of draw through carbureted applications other than on these kinds of blowers that were designed to have carburetors through them. And whenever we run carburetors on the blower, and especially when we run E85 carburetors on these types of blowers, on these types of draw through roots blowers, we get a dramatic cooling effect from the fuel, and it definitely acts like an intercooler. So even though we have an inefficient blower design, like of the Roots design. Still, we have really good charge cooling from the fuel being processed through there, and especially is the case if we have E85 going through there, and then the E85 itself is worth additional power as well. So lots of good things, lots of good things going on there. But let me know, what do you guys think? How's our poll doing? Do we need a like a low cost, kind of a lower horsepower kind of thing with a carburetor? So 78% are saying yes, that's pretty good. I think it would be cool. I ran that little 174, 177 blower on the big block, and that worked great. We weren't looking for on that combination, and I think that we're probably like a lot of people. There's no shortage of really big high power blowers. You can run 2650s or Whipples or Kenny Bells. There's lots of big blowers that you can run, Pro Chargers and Vortex, if you want to make 1,000+ horsepower. I don't think that obviously an M90 is not going to do that. And I don't think there's any need to make another one of those to compete in that sort of level. But I think there probably would be a lot of guys that would want to put low dollar, M90 stuff together. So it'd be interesting to see. But for me, I just liked being able to do the testing on it, and it was a really cool. As far as gee whiz projects go, it was it was pretty cool. It was fun just to spending the time with the porting tool and getting in there and the blue machinist die, getting in there and finding out where it needed to be machined. And when I say machined, I mean just with a porting tool and taking material off so that it was spin. And then once it did that, I'm like, yeah, we are winning. So I would be also curious to see, an actual measurement of how much room there is there in some spots. Like, do we have a big trough in some of those where I ported it relative, a big amount of distance basically in clearance between the rotor pack and the housing, because it was not precision machined. But sometimes when we're doing cool stuff like that, it's not done by precision. It's done because it's done based out of coolness. 8, what's going on? Works as good as it ever did. If we're talking M90s, I'm all in. That's good. I like to hear that. M90 talk. Yep. I think M90s are cool. The world needs an alternative to the big Whipples and Mopar blowers, big black Chevy blowers. That would be unique. As if you could make a dual carb setup, maybe cut up an M90 a little more. Yeah, you wouldn't need a dual carb setup on a 600 horsepower blower, because it's a single 950 or something, or even 1,000, since they make 4150s that are that big. It would be more than enough. Turbo Sentra, let's see, got the turbo swapped out. That's great. I had an oil feed problem. The reducer is plugged up with plastic, probably from the oil feed lines. That's not good. But the turbo did let go, and you got a new one on it. That's cool. Whipples win races. Yeah, the twin screw stuff works really well. Maybe get it cut with a water jet. It wasn't the cutting that was the problem. It's the welding actually that creates the issue. Modular power is in the house. Small blower, do 2-barrel Hollies with E85. Yeah, I don't know why you do two-barrel Hollies, but I guess you could spread them apart and put them end to end so that the big sides are away from each other. I need an M90 adapter to go on this tunnel ram for the 3.9 liter. That's pretty easy to make though, right? M90 needs to go on a 292 inline 6. I agree with that. No noticeable engine damage, so I'm gonna keep running it. Yeah, Turbo Sentra, did you do a compression test or anything to see if make sure all the cylinders are the same? You should do it on a 4.6. Yes, I know, a 2-valve. My 408 could do through a 4L60 and a G8 521, 467. That's a good power output. That means it's a good running 408. The Ford 300 inline 6 and the slant 6 both need M90s. I agree. How about towing with a positive displacement blower like an M90? That's not a problem at all. We towed all over the United States with that little 174 blower on the big block, and with a carburetor, and it worked fantastic. All right, Turbo Central, we'll see you, man. Have a good evening. He's got to get up in 6 hours. That comes pretty quick. Alan, what's going on? I disagree. You do need 2 carbs, one for each M90. Yeah, that would be good if you had 2 of them. Just a heads up for testing. Glass fiber reinforced epoxy is an easy way to attach aluminum to aluminum without welding. We use it on turbo Kawasaki heads to move ports, and it held up to 40 pounds. Okay. Glass fiber reinforced epoxy. So we could have probably epoxied that thing on, and it would have run certainly for what we were doing. EFI is better and all, but carbs still work as well. And well, there wouldn't be any reason that even if you had a carbureted M90 setup that you couldn't also run it EFI. I mean, it'd just be a different throttle body on it, and then the injectors would be in their normal spot. Anybody watching Texas 2K on YouTube? Is anybody out there watching that? Root style blower would be go-to for towing. I agree that they work good. Overbuilt. I need help. I have a Buick Riata, 1988, 3800 pre-series 1. Can I supercharge it? You can supercharge any motor. It just is a matter of how much work you want to put into it. John, that's right, Alan. That's good. Getting paid to watch. I like that. Everybody should work that out. Shows the valve springs are supposed to be there tomorrow. Cool. Thanks, Aaron, man. That's good. That means we can put boost on the Dodge. Yeah, what kind of epoxy did you use? Was it like JB Weld or something like that? Because won't that work? I mean, I think that would work good enough. Garage 54, Le Mans, NASCAR Camaro appears to use 4-to-1 headers that use 2-step primaries that look to have greater than 48 inches and maybe as much as 60 inches. Have you tested headers that long? I don't think I've ever tried one 60 inches. I have to go back and look at the testing that I did on the headers. I made adjustable headers. And we made them fairly long, but I don't remember what the total length was. You still need 16 2.2 liter retainers. I'm sure we have I have a bunch of 2.2 retainers. That's not a problem. If there are M90s, if the M90 will be available for 351 to 427 Cleveland, a 427 Cleveland might already make 600 horsepower NA, so it'd be more geared toward the smaller ones. Brian, Richard, I was originally going to do the eBay GT45, stumbled on a 7875. You think the 7875 would spool a lot better for my application? No, I don't think a 7875 will spool better than a GT45. But it could potentially make more power though. I have the time and tools, just don't know where to go and what needs to replace. I've gotten it back to good running condition. What were you trying to get done? Did I miss your comment before that? Oh, your Buick Riata. Yeah, I don't know specifically about that motor. I don't know what the upper and lower intake manifold looks like on that. Have you ever replaced a clutch on a chainsaw? I don't think I have. I think for chainsaws, the most I've done are replaced the chains on them. Waiting on parts so I can get my engine up and running. Brian, 318. Oh, on a 318. Yeah, the 7875 is a couple hundred horsepower more turbo than a GT45 is. I just got done putting a 142 Lion on 377 small block, producing 5 pounds Put a plate on it, spraying 100. That'll be good. Richard, how can us who do not have access to a dyno have a chance to keep your boosted engines from not leaning out and burning up? Keeping my boosted engines or your boosted engines? I would recommend anybody, if you're trying to tune something, that you have an air fuel meter on it. Air fuel meters are cheap. They're cheap insurance. And so if you put an air fuel meter on it and you go out and you stand on it, while you're trying to tune it or before you tune it, and you see that it's way too lean, then you don't do that. Then you make an adjustment, however you're going to make an adjustment. Tune it with a carburetor or tune it with an ECU and add fuel to it so that you don't have a lean condition. Daniel, happy to help. What would an optimal turbo be for a big block 8.1? There is no optimal turbo for that. There is only the optimal turbo to get done what you want it to get done. So how much power do you want to make? What is the application? What are you trying to do with it? And we can help steer you in the right way. The car farm, you're thinking about selling cars, GLHs and VNT Daytonas. Come and get them. How's the van running? I've rebuilt tons of stills. Cool. Did a motor swap on a commercial dryer last summer. That's nice. Factory supercharged manifold. There's no factory supercharged manifold for the Gen 1, is there? Or did some of those Series 1 motors have blowers on them? Are those the ones that had the M62s on them? If they did, then you could just put the factory stuff on. You mix chopped glass fiber into an industrial class epoxy. It's green in our case. We relocated the intake ports up and made the diameter larger and then ported the changes. Never failed. Cool. Is there any air fuel meter you'd recommend? Neither of my cars has one, but the AM wideband is the only one I've used in the past. I've used the Innovate. I've used AEM. I've used Fast. I've used the old, LED light BZ meters, which were surprisingly accurate. People laugh at that, but it's way better than not having anything. It tells you whether it's rich or whether it's lean. And actually, I was surprised because it's not even attached to a wideband meter. It's attached to a narrowband meter, but it was surprisingly accurate. I mean, and surprisingly consistent because we put a Hariba on it and ran it with that because I was measuring it against that little BZ meter. And dang it, if that thing it was definitely usable. It's not going to tell you the difference between 12.7 and 12.8, but it's going to tell you the difference between 12.7 and 11.7 or 13.7. And that's kind of what you want. What do you think of a Pro Charger kit for a Camaro? A Pro Charger stuff is good. They make good power. Every time I've ever run a Pro Charger, it works real well. It is a centrifugal blower, and it has a rising boost curve. So that's what you want. That's what that type of supercharger will do. Stay away from Innovate. You didn't like the Innovate stuff? We ran Innovate on all of our Bonneville motors, and it worked fantastic. Van's good. Got to put in the wideband next and fix the wastegate. Okay. So the transmission swap worked good, Ben? Ben and Brian did a transmission swap on a turbo Dodge van with a 2.5 in it, and now it's some kind of modified one because it was running lots of boost and stuff, and I think it hurt the transmission or the converter or something. So they did a swap on it and put another farm transmission in it, and I'm glad it's working. I'm going with the Innovate. There you go. Just starting off with a 400 351M could work too. Yeah, all of those would work. Do you have any experience with Promax heads on a 302? Yes, I do. Everything that I've run from Promax has worked well, and I've run their forward heads, and their forward heads worked good. We didn't run it on a 302. I think we ran it on some kind of stroker, but they worked good. Performance World needs an inexpensive blower capable of 600, 700, no matter what it is. Would an Eaton M62 Gen 5 supercharger work on a pre-Series 1 3800? You could make that work, but it's not going to be a bolt-on kind of deal. You don't need a Gen 5 supercharger on that. I have a 5.3 liter L83 and want to make a lot of power. What steps should you take? You should contact the guys at Brian Tooley Racing. How much boost do you think a stock Dodge 360 can handle with the great rotating assembly and horsepower it would handle? Well, how much are you trying to make? Are you trying to make 1,000 or more? Any experience with the VR6 3.6? That's what size of VR6 is? I thought that they were smaller than that. Richard, where would the O2 sensor be placed to monitor air-fuel ratio on a boosted carbureted application? In the exhaust, just in the collector. Car Farm, the transmission swap is done, but I have more transplants. It's going to be on the channel. Cool. Big Block Chevy is in a 4x4 single cab, short bed, dually, 38-inch tires, Allison trans, looking for 600 to 800 horsepower. I hate grass. Running a 229, 242, 600 lift, 112 LSA. Looking at the Truck Norris, but not sure how drastic a difference there are from each other. The Truck Norris is going to make less than that. It's going to make more low-speed power, but it's going to make less peak power than that camshaft. Take a look. Go take a look at the comparison between the Truck Norris and the Sloppy Stage 2, and that will give you an idea. You want to make 1,500? I don't think a stock 360 block is what I would use to try to make 1,500. What about the exhaust gas temperature gauge before and after the turbo? We always run them after the turbo, and I always run them down in the collector. On naturally aspirated motors, they usually run them in. Sorry, Bruno's coming pushing me out of the way because he wants to get under here and lay down. Are you going to lay down? They run them in the header, you know, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches or whatever after the head on the exhaust port or on the primary port. They have 3.2 and 3.6 VR6s out for the past couple of decades. Okay. Porsche ones are 3.6. Didn't your 5.3 truck lose power with the M90? Did you figure out what happened? Yeah, it's not losing. I mean, if the M90 is more than big enough for a 5.3 liter. We've already shown that. It's already made over 600 horsepower. On my truck is a grounding issue, I think. My big block square body is a beast in the streets with a single GT45. The wideband air-fuel ratio I used before, the sensor was mounted on the downpipe of a turbo 2-liter Ecotec with my L7. Where should I put the sensor given the exhaust path is separate until the X-pipe? We normally run, that's a naturally aspirated motor. We normally run it in one header collector or the other. It's normally in the collector. We do that just because we're going to have something to extend the collector. And so usually the header is sealed and we don't have to worry about sealing issue between the connection. But somewhere in the collectors, normally we'll rerun it. You can run it on either side. Sometimes we'll run it and then we'll swap sides to make sure that from side to side it's consistent. But most of the time we don't do that. We just run it. We just run it with it on one side. Richard, got any experience spinning an iron block 4.6 over 7,000? I have a TFS headed iron block 4.6. I'm looking to spin to 7,500 to 8,000. I'm just a bit concerned of cap walk on the 2-bolt main. Do you have a combination that's going to want a 2-valve combination that's going to want to make power at 8,000? Your truck has those hard to get to grounds at the back of the passenger side head. Yeah, it's not as bad though when we take the intake manifold off, because we have to take the factory truck intake manifold off to get to the, to swap on the other intake manifold and the blower. The rotating assembly says it can handle 1,500 horsepower, but I don't think the block can. I wouldn't think that a stock 360 block is 1,500 horsepower. Okay. You had the cylinder sleeve. Well, that should help. And are those 2-bolt main blocks? I just don't know about the strength around the main webbing and that kind of stuff. That's not something I've heard people make 1,000,000 horsepower with. Carb M90, yes, we could almost have a Super Richie 4.3 liter Vortec M90 plate and easily put a Sniper or equivalent on it. Yeah, 4.3 liter definitely needs to have the blower put on it. Dan says we used to sleeve the small block Mopar blocks even at 600 horsepower. Daniel, you forgot your meds. You will not make 1,500 with stock to small block Mopar block, maybe with R3 block. The other issue is going to be keeping head gaskets. I do the Innovate one that has air fuel and ethanol content. Oh, cool. I put a car from Junkyard Trans in Richard's truck too. Yep, the old farm transmission. 4.6 block, full forge, ARP, everything. It's getting a Kenny Bell, and it's a Kenny Bell, and you want to run it to 8,000. Is that the one? Got my TBS intake, and it had the wrong. Went and ordered another one. Got to send the rec port one back. Well, a Trailblazer SS intake manifold is not a rec port intake manifold. It's a cathedral port intake manifold, because the Trailblazer SS had cathedral port heads on it, right? Am I right there? Is somebody check my math? It's just an old farm truck. That's right. I have a turbo 4.3 liter Vortec ZR2 5-speed, but I want the M90. I think your turbo 4.3 liter probably works better than an M90 does. Innovate has dual ones for both sides. I've seen those too. We never had that kind of, we never had dual side Innovate money, but 7,500 is the goal. There are truck versions of the rec port manifolds, like an LY6 and stuff, but that's not a Trailblazer SS. I think people are just calling it that. Stick a Cyclone engine in ZR2. It's going to be hard to find Cyclone engines, I would imagine. How's our poll doing? 78%. Okay. I thought we were up over 80 there for a while. $300 for a gauge to make sure I don't blow up a $20,000 427. Yep, that's money well spent. That just makes good financial sense. I don't know what I did here. Oh, there we go. 78%. Yeah, and Sean, I obviously am joking about that, because you would definitely want to have some sort of air fuel meter, and it's one of the best things that we spent money on for our Bonneville car was having, you know, we need to know the air fuel ratio. Otherwise, it's just not going to work very well. And you'd be surprised at all the people that are out of Bonneville that say, hey, look, I don't know what the air fuel is. We just read the plugs. I'm like, wow. Those are the ones that are popping and spitting and misfiring and stuff. That's right, Dan. You're losing money if you don't buy it. My cat just clawed my head while stealing my hat. See how cats are? I never put the engine on the dyno, but with the old setup for flywheel horsepower, but on nitrous with a Dana 60 410 gear and built axles, I had 613 at the wheels. That's good. Had a ride in a Coyote pickup. Okay. In retrospect, I should have just done a Texas block. Yeah, probably would have been better. I mean, you would have made more power if you'd done a 4-valve, but here we are at 2-valve iron block stuff. I'm aiming for 7,500, but it's not a requirement. Okay. I mean, you're going to make power way before that, but do you have big cams in it and stuff and ported heads? You lost me at rear mounted turbo. Come on, man. That still works. So Aaron, there's not enough strength in the main webbing. That's what I was wondering about. Turbo's mounted under the pickup bed. That's good, man. That works. Yeah, Dan, I've tested rear mounted turbos. Well, not rear mounted turbos, remote turbos I've tested. Sometimes cats do that, man. You're just looking, just minding your own business. And they're like, oh yeah, now it's time. Can you port the Trailblazer SS for 102 millimeter throttle blade? I don't know if there's enough meat there. Does that have a receiver groove for the gasket, like the O-ring gasket? 102 usually gets into that. So you'd have to figure out a way to make that work. And I don't know, what I would look at is measure as you go farther in, like maybe you could get the entry that big, but if you're getting the entry that big and the rest of it's not that big, it's really just kind of a waste of time. And do you need a 102 millimeter throttle body? Just run a 90 or a 92. What power output are you at? I only like rear-mounted turbos on Lamborghinis and Porsches. Dan's going to second that, I'm sure. It's like 12 to 14 feet of charge piping. Yep, that's like the one that I did on the engine dyno. I do 5 pounds on an M90 and 5 pounds on a rear-mounted turbo. The turbos always win if you do a boost for boost thing versus a blower. Are the thinner MLS 3-layer better than the thicker 5-layer head gaskets on nitrous or boost? I'm going to do 400 to 500 on a controller. I think you're going to break something else, and not have to worry about the head gasket. All of the ones that I've run have not been, I don't think I've ever run a 3-layer one. I did a remote turbo to help keep underhood temps lower and keep the AC. That's good. At least they're not electric turbos. All right, Eric. The ones that we ran on the Big Bang motor were the LS9 head gaskets, the factory ones. LS 1000 horsepower. Not much info on guys running iron blocks at 4.6 over 7,000. I don't think I have. We've run 2 7,000 before when I put short runner manifolds on there and we put big cams in it. But I don't think I've never tried to go to 8,000 on a 2-valve. So Danny, what's your question? 1,000 horsepower LS is any kind of LS with a S475 or an S480 with it, with any kind of motor with a, you know, ring gap and a mild cam and springs, and injectors and good pump. And if this is about is this about the throttle body question? You could run a 78 millimeter throttle body, but a 90 is more than big enough. You don't need a big throttle body on there. You're good. Large throttle bodies are not necessary on boosted applications. Does a performance world need a Carb M90 blower capable of 600 to 700 horsepower? 76% are saying yes. All right. We're going to get all crazy. We're going to live chat. I don't know if it's going to change anything. The thing about rear mount turbos is you don't need mufflers. Yeah, those are cool looking mufflers if they're hanging out the back like that. And the remote turbo thing that I did, they worked fine. They worked well. I could see why guys want to put them in the bed of trucks and stuff. Does nobody have detonation or pinging anymore? I'm sure a lot of people do. But pinging is power. Yeah, Danny, honestly, I wouldn't worry about it. And also you could just put the 102 on there, but you need to make sure it's going to seal on the O-ring that they have for that. Next time you walk past your Magnum engine with the oil pan off, take a look at it. It's going to be exactly the same as the LA. You see how weak it is compared to a small block Chevy. Okay. I didn't look when we were doing the piston flip. I got another piston flip question comment or a message sent to me about wanting to know if I would do it again because the offset on the Dodge motor that I did was not enough to really show. But if I did it on a Ford, it would definitely be worth 20 horsepower. So I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm sorry. You need to look somewhere else. If you have a small block Ford and you want 20 horsepower, there's way better places to look than piston flipping. My remote turbo 4.3 liter Vortec is 18 inches from the exhaust tip. Okay. So that's basically mufflers back there. My original comment was not one or the other. Oh, but a compound. Yeah, you can compound anything. If you want to have a blower thrown in there, you know, because that's how you like to party, that's good. I'm not going to turn the engine over 6,300 RPM. That will help the webbing with the nitrous. Okay. I'm concerned about the I'm concerned about the webbing. I'm not concerned about the webbing from RPM. I'm concerned about the webbing from cylinder pressure. I just want to get 900 to the tire. Okay. Yeah, Dan, I that's what I told them. I said, look, I said, it's not going to be 20. I said, if it was 2, if you even got 2, I'd be really excited about it. I said, but it didn't show anything. Didn't even show 0.2. So it's not a thing. And on a small block Ford, especially if he's got a 5-liter Ford or whatever, there's so many places that you can find horsepower. Just put better heads on it, put a camshaft in it, put any of the 20 or 30 different intake manifolds that you could put on it. There's so many places that you could get power from. You can get 20 horsepower from the oiling system, but you're not going to get it from flipping pistons. I like to party. M90 on a Vortec. Yep, that's good. GT35 82 turbo. Got one of these eBay turbos. Think will work well on a 2J or a 5MG. Yeah, it's just limited, and I mean should be pretty responsive on one of those at least. Twin charge Cadillac will be up and running. That's very cool. I don't know. I don't know what their theory is. I don't know why they think that that's going to make power. I don't know if they think it's changing, rod angularity or piston scuffing or something. I just know that when we tested it, it didn't do anything. And we went through all of those things with, I think we talked to Billy Godboll, we talked to several piston manufacturers and stuff. And Freiberger did a deep dive down it and did lots of math and stuff. And it was just and Billy said the same thing. He goes, he said, even if you change something, it is changing something. When you change that, when you change the angularity, he said, it does change things mathematically. He said, but it's statistically insignificant. It's not changing it enough. What would an M90 do on a 6-liter LS? It depends on, are you putting it on a stock one? The M90 will support more than 600 horsepower, we know. So if you have it on a motor that makes less than that and you spin it fast enough, it could make that much. Oh, Dustin, be safe out there. Just had a tornado roll through a few miles away. We had high winds here, but not like that. I have an eBay GT45 for 1500 HD. What is a 450 horsepower turbo? I know they say it's a 600 horsepower, but yeah. You want a 450 horsepower turbo? Maybe a GT3076 or something smaller, a GT28 maybe? A TO4E? I don't know any vehicles that don't party. The C60 parties. That's good. There is, because it changes the dwell time of the piston at TDC, but it's so small. Yeah. That's the same theory that they're talking about with rod length too. 6-liter M90 needs 6-liter needs 2 M90s. It only needs 1 if you have a stock 6-liter. If you have a stock 6-liter and you put an M90 on it, it'll add 100 horsepower to that. James, why doesn't Richard like you anymore? I'm really hoping we're seeing the Bitcoin price retraction. I was thinking what happened back under 70,000 right now. So is it time to jump on right now? Just go all in on Bitcoin? 2JZ 450 horsepower is all I need. Come on, James. James, you're OG, man. You've been here. You put in the miles. Put in the hours. Any chance you'll be able to get your hands on a new LT6? No. Is that the double overhead cam thing? I've only run one LT5, so LT6 is way out of my price range. And if the LT6 is that quad cam motor or whatever, the super high horsepower one, it already has a specific output that makes for modifications, or the gains that you get from modifications are going to be not very much. I mean, I don't know how much better you're going to be able to make it. Just got done with another 5.3 DOD delete, sloppy stage 2 at 799s. There you go. I'm curious why you put 799s on it. What was wrong with the heads that were on it? Yeah, the Z06 engine is already really good by itself. I don't know. I mean, you could obviously run boost to it, but I would be curious to see what if there's anything to be had from ported head. I'm sure there's got to be something from cam timing, right? Although I don't know who's gonna be the first person to make aftermarket cams for that. Oh, that 5.3 that you did came with 799s. Okay, that makes sense. That's different. My last tuner was running a 2J and an early 80s Supra, second gen. 2J with an HX35, turbo pushing 525 of the tires. That's a lot. Everything is better with boost. That's right. If I were you, I'd see if it dips under 60,000 the next 2 days and then have a good opportunity to make 10%. Oh, that's good. Aluminum 5.3 with 799s out of an Envoy. Was that a LC9 or an LH6 or something? Ferrari V12s don't need to be muffled by turbos. Oh, well, Ferrari's embracing boost, just like, and Honda is too. It's pretty easy to make a lot of power with that. So we will stop our poll at 77% in 23. So yes on the carb turbo. Boost costs money. Nitrous is cheap. Yeah, I don't know now with the advent of offshore turbos. I don't know which one of those is a cheaper route. Just drop a 4.6 in and gap everyone, because that's crazy plumbing for F1 turbo setups. Nitrous adds up over time. Nitrous runs out. Nitrous keep having to fill bottles. It's all the same argument. Power outages are all good. That's right. That is true. Compressed air supercharging. Yeah, that's free, right? All you have to do is compress it. Yeah, Sean, they get those big, the nitrous fill bottles, the ones that you get at those gas suppliers. I don't know how big those are. I wonder how many pounds are in those. There's like 50 or 100 or something. I like both because nitrous makes it spool quicker. That's true. That does happen. The Envoy is going to be rear-wheel drive. Yeah, get rid of that hokey pan. Turbo TBI Suburban. Do you have a blow-through TBI setup? Yeah, Dan, you're right. It doesn't take very much to get rid of turbo lag. It doesn't take very much nitrous at all, especially if you're doing it down low. People think, oh, I'm just going to add like a 30 shot or 40 shot. But when you do that at 2,000 RPM or 2,500 RPM, it calculates to a lot of torque. And that's what you need. You don't need cam timing. You just need a little bit of, you need more torque down low. That's what adds boost response. Suburban is a Mega Squirt shift setup with a 4L80. Do you have any experience with half filling the cooling passages on a stock block? On which stock block are you talking about? GT3076. Yeah, seemed like a good for one of my smaller engines. Yeah, that would be good. Nothing hits quite as hard as nitrous, but it does add up over time. We're running a 300 shot. And see, running a 300 shot empties the bottle pretty quick. Got 1 more minute. Oh, a stock small block Chevy. I've never filled the block, so I don't know how, and I don't have any details on what it did versus what it could do versus what it didn't do. I've never tried that. Dan says we filled more than half the block on the super stockers, usually within an inch of the top. So you weren't concerned with cooling, obviously, right? Would you half fill it if you wanted? Could you drive something like a half filled block? Could you still drive that around? James, I have a TBSS all-wheel drive, converted to two-wheel drive, was an LY6, but now an LS3, gap rings, truck intake, should make 900. Same BS pan, but the oil pan pressure bypass, 40 PSI minimum. Yeah, don't they have some sort of bypass in the pan that's weird on those? I've never run one of those pans. I got one on that LH6 that we just threw away. I have 2 bottles, 1 for each kit. Yep. They get hotter and hotter as you progress in later stages. Couldn't keep them cool. Yeah, that's a problem. I'm planning on running a bypass after the turbo. Do you foresee any boost issues from it? What do you mean a bypass? Good oil cooler is a must. Half filled would probably work on the street. Wastegate after the turbo? Are you talking about a blow-off valve? Keep it streetable, but reinforce the block. So you want to do a partial fill on it? I've never filled the block, so I'm the wrong guy to ask. Block the oil pressure bypass, BS, makes 80 PSI of oil pressure cold and 40 hot at idle. Okay, that's good. I meant to say wastegate after the turbo. On a turbo application, a wastegate on the cold side is not a good idea. All the big blocks I worked on were filled. Yeah, James. No, I recognize what motor it was. I think by after he means the hot side. I hope not, because that's not going to do anything. That's going to be an exhaust cutout. Then that will just change the noise. Yeah, on the cold side, it's just a blow-off valve or a bypass valve, depending on where you're routing the air that you're releasing. It either goes back onto the inlet side or just discharges to atmosphere. And either way, that's more of something that happens on the shift when you close the throttle valve, and you don't want to build up pressure in that system. Doesn't Matt sometimes put wastegates on the turbine housing? Yeah, that's still on the feed into the turbo though. So anywhere in between the exhaust valve and the turbo, you can have a wastegate. He's just doing that for positioning, though, more because more for fitment than anything else. Sometimes having the wastegate there allows it to fit rather than having the turbo there and then having to have the wastegate come off of the combination of exhaust tubes. Richard, I got to correct myself from earlier. It was the 12 cylinder. It wasn't Holly that did the demonstration. It was Haltech. That's whose computer and harness we're going to be using. Is there anything I can do to the block to help it last? I don't know. Do they have main girdles for those? That might help. A main girdle is not going to stop the web, not going to change the webbing strength, though. Yeah, Dan, that's what I was saying. The webbing is probably the problem. But on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will be back tomorrow.